Joining us today. I'm Michael Barham, EPIP's Membership and Operations Manager, and your host for this afternoon session, our fourth EPIP webinar of 2015, How Barbie Ate Science and Math Outcomes, Feminine Norms, and STEM. How do gender norms impact educational choices? The causes of the lower participation of girls in science, technology, engineering, and math disciplines have been much debated, while recent research has demonstrated how internalized feminine norms, especially in girls of color, can impact academic interests and pursuits. What can we do to challenge rigid gender norms before they ossify? What role can philanthropy play? Hopefully, we'll be able to delve into many of these questions. Today, we're joined by Ricky Wilchins. Ricky is an expert on gender theory who's done groundbreaking work applying a gender lens to youth issues and education. This is actually the second time Ricky has been gracious enough to join us for an EPIP webinar and share her expertise, so we're especially grateful. And there's a lot to learn, so a whole lot to get to. I'll walk through a few items of housekeeping, introduce Ricky in more detail shortly, but before I do, just want to familiarize those of you who don't know much about EPIP with who we are and what we do. We are a national network of foundation professionals and social entrepreneurs and other change makers who strive for excellence in the practice of philanthropy. This is a philanthropy with both a big and a small piece. So whether you work in institutional philanthropy on the periphery, for a nonprofit doing philanthropic work, or just practice philanthropy in your personal life, we are a place for you. And we provide a platform for our community to connect with others, both locally through our 12 local chapters and nationally through our national conference and webinars just like this one. We also provide a platform for our community to learn and practice leadership skills and inspire each other by sharing their voice and becoming thought leaders in the sector. So what's next for EPIP? First and foremost, national conference is taking place in New Orleans from May 12th through the 14th. If you haven't been to an EPIP conference, this is definitely the one to get to. Early bird registration is open and actually expires 2 days from today, so make sure to register as soon as possible. Also upcoming for us, the next EPIP webinar, Social Justice Trends in New Media, How New Civil Rights Movements Take Shape. It's taking place 2 weeks from today, same time, March 18th, 3 p.m. We'll be joined by EPIP board member and EPIP Philly chapter leader Sharon Rice to talk about the new media landscape, so don't miss that. And lastly, MC Mal is our seven-month applied learning campaign. We're focusing on a new skill each month, this month's being social justice and racial analysis. Join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag EPIPLeaders and follow us at EPIP National. As you've seen, we have a whole lot in store for 2015, including this webinar, webinars upcoming, and our conference. Hopefully this event today will whet your appetite for upcoming programs and events. Plenty of ways to get involved, and now is certainly a great time to get started. Feel free to reach out to me for more information or just hop on the website. But that's what I'm here for, so always happy to talk. Okay, quick run through the agenda and a few items of housekeeping. We're going to jump into just a few poll questions. Make sure you all are with us shortly. We're also going to hear from Ricky and Ricky's presentation, and then we'll save some time, we'll reserve some time for Q&A for about the last 10 to 15 minutes. As you all can see, as attendees, you're currently on mute. If you have general questions, technical difficulties, or content questions, feel free to use the question box. We'll be sure to monitor that throughout the session. Also, if you have to hop off early, we are recording this webinar. You can visit the EPIP website within a week. It should be up along with the slides. And help us out. We always want to improve our programs. Please complete the post-webinar survey. So, as I mentioned, we are joined today by Ricky Wilchins. Ricky is Executive Director of True Child, the author of 3 books on gender theory. She has conducted trainings for the White House, CDC, Office on Women's Health, Office on Adolescent Health, and the DC and San Diego public school systems. Time magazine selected her one of 100 civic innovators for the 21st century, which is obviously very exciting. And Ricky was also the 2014 EPIP Activist Award winner. So Time magazine, EPIP. Ricky, you can tell us which one was more important to you. But
the only thing that meant anything was EPIP, frankly. Time magazine, who cares?
That's what
my grandmother can get a Time magazine, but EPIP, that meant something.
Exactly. That's great. So you all heard Ricky, and without further ado, I'm going to toss it to you, Ricky. Everyone's heard plenty from me. Ricky, I'm going to allow you to share your screen momentarily. You should have that option.
That would definitely help.
That would help. And as Ricky gets set up there, I'm also going to share a few quick poll questions. We want to learn a little bit more about everyone who's joining us today. So, first question. Are you paying attention or just on your email? We're trying to catch those nappers today. So please let us know. Paying attention, emailing. Maybe you're doing both. Hopefully you're primarily paying attention, and some of you might have missed the question. So that
if only 2 people answer, I think it should default to doing my email. You know.
Yeah, well, it looks like we had most people answer, and 90% of people are paying attention. So that's great. I'm glad that we have everyone's attention. Okay, so with that, we have a couple of other more serious questions to ask you all. We want to know just a little bit of how the webinar relates to your work. So maybe you do youth work in education, kind of generally in gender equity, a bit along all these lines, or perhaps you're just interested, like many of us are, in learning more. Okie doke, looks like we heard from a bunch of you, so I'm going to close that poll shortly.
And Michael, I'm just going to ask you quickly, because it didn't let me choose the monitor this time. Do you see the main first slide, or do you see the slide shorter view with all the slides on it?
No, right now we just see the poll, so it should allow you to share the entire screen shortly. So hang on.
Awesome.
I'm going to close this poll. We can see the results.
And just to tally mine, I personally have been paying attention. I am not doing my email. So
That's what you say, but we'll see. Yeah, okay. But it looks like folks do work in youth work, education, 30% or so in gender equity, and 30% just here to learn more, which is a very good reason as well. And lastly, are you working with boys, girls, or kind of on a co-ed basis? So if you're doing kind of this specific work with youth, how targeted is your work? All right, great. Looks like a bunch of folks have responded, so I'm going to close that. Ricky, you should be able to see 75% doing kind of co-ed work and 25% working primarily with girls.
I can't see that for some reason. It might be under my PowerPoint, though.
It might be under that, but I gave you the honest numbers. So
thank you. Appreciate that.
All right, so I'm going to hide that, and Ricky, we should have the option to finally view your screen. Great. Okay. I can see the first slide, so we are good to go.
Perfect. It remembered which screen. So thank you all for coming, and Michael for that wonderful introduction. Always a pleasure. A little bit about me, Michael already mentioned most of this, so I'm not going to spend too much time. My last book is actually back in print, kind of happy about that one. Let's talk a little bit about what we're going to do today. He had mentioned that we have done these presentations for women's health, adolescent health, and other folks. This is actually based on work we're doing for the Motorola Solutions Foundation. Very proud to be working with them. So we're going to talk about a little bit of background, and we're going to talk about terms and definitions, dive a little bit into gender norms specifically, and then how femininity, feminine norms impact STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. Some common objections and then some open questions. So I call this exercise the 6 degrees of gender. It's like the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon website, because gender links to so many different concepts and ideas that we use in philanthropy and policy. It's a highly overloaded term. So these are some of the things that I won't be talking very much about today. Biological sex, which is, primary and secondary sexual characteristics in males and females, chromosomes, hormones, etc. Won't be talking too much about gender identity, which is an inner sense of being male or female, a useful term if you're dealing with transgender or transsexual individuals. And finally, sexual orientation, attraction to members of one or more sexes. We'll be talking about gender equity, which is ensuring equal access, especially when it comes to STEM, and hopefully equal interest and equal participation. Gender norms, which are these ideals, scripts, and beliefs that we all kind of start internalizing pretty much from the time we're born, or how to be men and women, boys and girls. And finally, this long term, that's one of my heroes, Gita Rao Gupta, who used to work at the International Center for Research on Women, ICRW, coined, which refers to programs or funding policies that highlight, challenge, and ultimately try to change rigid gender norms and the inequities that they cause. So a little bit more about that gender transformative part. One of the things that you see in philanthropy typically, at least in the U.S., not internationally, they've kind of drunk the Kool-Aid on this, but we'll talk about that later. But domestically, when you look at even the very best policy and guidelines that we have and the very best thinking, like I love grant making with the gender lens, one of the key documents in the field. But when you look on the term gender norms, it tells you that no matches were found because the phrase does not appear in there, nor does the phrase masculinity or femininity. So this kind of disconnect between the idea of pursuing gender equity for women and girls, but also not talking about gender norms, that disconnect is pretty typical in U.S. grant making, kind of across the field, and also, I should say, in policy as well. I think the reason it's specifically important when we're talking about STEM is we've done a great job on things like external obstacles. We've looked at things like a cluster of different barriers to girls staying in STEM, being interested in STEM, masculine pedagogy, lack of female role models, with the interpersonal obstacles like negative teacher attitude, negative teacher bias, negative parental attitudes, what's called stereotype threat. What we don't do such a good job on is internal obstacles, girls' own belief systems. There seems to be this kind of idea that if we could just kind of clear away all these externals, the girls would soar in their STEM interest and participation. But then you kind of got to wonder, it kind of begs the question, if internal beliefs are not involved, then why does STEM interest measurably decline from grades 5 to 9? That's when the quote-unquote leaky pipeline, as we all call it. Why does the STEM pipeline start leaking from grades 5 to 9 specifically if girls' own attitudes aren't involved? Did parental attitudes just suddenly take a change? Did girls suddenly start really missing female role models? Did unconscious teacher bias suddenly kick in? You have to kind of think that there's something about the girls. By 8th grade, only half as many girls report being interested as boys in STEM. And even among girls with good STEM grades who reported liking it in elementary school, this phenomenon happened. So it's not just the girls who were good at it and they dropped out. Even if they got good grades and said they liked it, all of a sudden something happens around ages 8 to 14. You kind of got to wonder what that is. If the girls' attitudes aren't involved and it's simply external barriers. And we'll come back to this in just a moment. So adding gender norms into the mix. I think, as I said, we've seen it work from an empowerment model that assumes that all the problems the girls have are external. And the girls act as individuals, they have full autonomy, they make rational decisions about things. And because of that, our funding tries to provide more information, more training, better programs, and opportunity. And if you're coming from an empowerment model, that certainly makes sense. Unfortunately, the empowerment model doesn't work too well with 10, 11, and 12-year-olds. A gender transformative model would look not only at those variables, but also look at things like social context, the fact that adolescents in particular lack anything like full agency to make decisions on their own behalf. It would also look at ideals and pressures. Girls at that age, and for that matter boys, are as likely to make decisions based on what their friends think or how they're afraid of being seen as they are in a cool, rational assessment of the facts that our funding is providing them. So if you believe in the transformative model that people exist, particularly adolescents, that people in general exist in a social context, in a community where they may not have full agency, they have to take into account others' thoughts and ideas, and they don't necessarily, we all aren't rational actors, I guess is the simplest way to say it. So your funding would want to look at things like beliefs, attitudes, and community practices, as well as providing opportunities, information, and programs. And so that's kind of a more transformative take in a nutshell. What we're trying to do is highlight, challenge, and hold up these beliefs, attitudes, and practices, and key among them, of course, especially when you're dealing with young girls, would be what's feminine. So a little bit about gender norms. They are learned. I mentioned what happens between 8 and 14. That is what some researchers have described as the gender intensification period, when interest in traditional gender norms starts to accelerate and belief in them starts to solidify. And yes, that is little Bow Wow kissing his guns. He's now grown up, so we now supposed to refer to him just as Bow Wow. Michael, you and I both need our rap names, I'm telling you. Gender norms are highly, you might have one, I don't. Gender norms are highly regulated. There is unfortunately an immensely elaborate vocabulary in the English language, most of which probably my 8-year-old daughter already knows, for describing and stigmatizing and calling out the least degree of gender nonconformity. So if you think of words as tools, as being instrumental, as things that we invent to do specific things and communicate specific ideas, it's interesting that the English language has all these terms to regulate and punish gender nonconformity and not a single positive word to describe someone who is exceeding or superseding traditional gender ideals. Gender norms take practice. I don't know if any of you follow Boondocks. I love his work. You can see in this one, it may have come through real clearly. He's doing all these fierce faces, and his brother peeks in the door and says, "You're still practicing your thug mug?" And he says, "Hey, keeping it real. It's hard work when you're cursed with cuteness." So, and if you watch kids at that gender intensification period, you can actually see them practicing the gestures and specific ways of standing and all kinds of things. The impact of rigid gender norms, like so many things, is enhanced in low-impact environments where gender codes on the street may be especially narrow and penalties for transgressing them or exceeding them may be particularly harsh. So let's talk a little bit specifically about feminine norms. Thank you. Thank you, Disney, for helping us out. You know, it's always all the same girls, just they change the dress and the hair. You gotta love it. So I think of traditional feminine norms as being the 3 Ds. You're supposed to be deferential, desirable, and dependent. That's kind of it in a nutshell. Traditional femininity is about being, passive, deferring to male figures, being maternal, caretaking, and so forth. What ends up missing from that list? Well, things like being logical, rational, intellectual, assertive, and independent. All the kinds of things that you would hope girls would internalize if they were going to excel in science and technology. The impacts, we're going to focus mostly on STEM, obviously, for the rest of this, but I just thought it was a little detour. So some people are referring to gender norms as a gateway belief system, with the idea that once you buy into them, you are likely to have lower life outcomes across a cluster of related areas. So for those of you who don't just do STEM or don't do STEM at all, girls who buy into traditional feminine norms are more likely to quit school early, more likely to have unplanned or early pregnancies, more likely to be victims of partner violence or abuse, more likely to have just generally low self-efficacy and self-worth, more likely to objectify and be out of touch with their bodies, be depressed and develop eating disorders. So kind of a checklist, if you will, for lower life outcomes, not only in STEM and education, but also in sexual and reproductive health and even economic empowerment. So let's talk specifically about STEM. What I'd like to suggest is that as girls who do well at STEM, girls who report liking STEM, as they enter this gender intensification period, they are basically forced into a double bind where they have to choose between opting out of traditional femininity, love that picture, and opting out of STEM. Oh, all right, wrong picture, folks. There's the right picture. That's what we wanted. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So girls basically have to choose. You kind of can't do both. And we actually asked them, we convened focus groups of young Black and Latina girls and said, you know, can't you be feminine and pretty and popular with boys and also be good at science and math? And they kind of busted out laughing and looked at each other and said, yeah, but not in junior high. And so we pressed them. We said, what's up with that? And they said, well, first on, they went to describe a classmate who's very studious, but no one sees as pretty because she's like a nerd. And then they said, look, you know, in middle school, what's so special about middle school? And they said, that's when you got to start dumbing it down for boyfriends. That's when girls have to focus more on, oh, he wants me to be pretty. So if you kind of look at that, and I'm not saying that this is wholly writ, we only did, 3 or 4 focus groups. But if you kind of look at that, what jumps out is that these are not external barriers. Nothing, not one of them mentioned their parents or teachers or the lack of a computer classroom on their floor. These are all internal things the girls are going through, and it's very conscious and intentional. These girls are thinking about it, they're making decisions, and when it comes to being popular and pretty and having boyfriends or being good at science and math, it's just not even a contest. It's like when Michael said, which is more important, EPIP or time? It's just not a contest at all. So these girls are making conscious decisions, and we're just kind of not addressing this at all. So as we press them, well, this is kind of the same thing. We talk, asking, what is going on specifically around the whole thing around prettiness, and they said that's when girls start getting up, they start noticing boys, they start slacking on academics and worrying about looks. So am I trying to say it's all gender? No, these are very complex problems. I don't think there's no silver bullet here that solves everything, and I don't mean to imply that there is. What I am saying is that if you were looking for the next big drop on the meter in programmatic effectiveness when you're dealing with trying to keep girls in the STEM pipeline, if you were looking for that next big drop on the meter in effectiveness, you would want to look at feminine norms. Why? Well, first of all, because the girls tell us that's a huge issue. But second, and I don't think this is a difficult proposition to argue, because when you teach girls to think critically about harmful feminine norms, you will get better outcomes than if you ignore or overlook them. And that's kind of so crucial here. I just want to repeat that. When we teach girls to think critically about harmful feminine norms, we get better outcomes than if we ignore them. Now, like I said, I don't think that's a difficult proposition to argue. And if you've ever been around an adolescent or if you've been through middle school, you pretty much already know that gender norms are a primary rite of passage for almost every young girl. But it seems to be so obvious that we're missing it. And we sometimes refer to gender norms as a revolution of the obvious. It's kind of something everybody kind of knows, but nobody actually specifically addresses or talks about. And I think that's one of the places that our STEM funding and programming is stuck. The last 20 years, we've really focused on all these external variables, and we're just not moving the needle. I mean, things get better, but things still don't get fixed. And it just may be that that next big drop on the meter that's out there on STEM really is addressing the girls' own attitudes. And I don't want to oversell this. I mean, it says to think critically. It doesn't say teach girls to change their minds about harmful feminine norms. I can't change my daughter DJ's mind about what Nickelodeon shows to watch. So you're not going to change a 10-year-old's mind about anything of any importance. But what you can do, and what I try to do with DJ, is to get her to think critically. You know, when the first Barbie showed up unbidden in our house, someone decided to get her a whole Barbie thing without even asking us. And what we did was we started asking her questions. Well, we like to run on the playground. So how does Barbie run when she's in tiptoes? You know, why can't she be flat-footed? Why does everything have to be high heels? Look at how small her waist is. Do you think a girl could really have a waist that small? Why do all Barbies have to have long blonde hair? You know, and we try to get her to think about issues of diversity, issues of body size and scale. I don't know that it got rid of the Barbie any sooner. It finally disappeared, but you want them to think critically, and that's what I think we're aiming for here. So I mentioned earlier that the international folks have already kind of drunk the Kool-Aid on this, not so much on STEM, because that's not a big thing internationally. When you look at a cross-section of programs around things like reproductive health, HIV, partner violence, you find that organizations across the board, the big institutional funders, are kind of all on board with this. World Health Organization has put out one report after another about the importance of addressing feminine norms. USAID will even fund new programs that lack a strong gender analysis in developing countries. CARE, International Planned Parenthood, the World Bank. The World Bank has now come out and said that gender norms are not only a foundation of inequality, but that addressing cultural gender norms in communities is as important as offering jobs or resources. Sorry, important as offering opportunity or resources. So that's a pretty big statement. The World Bank invests hundreds of millions of dollars in loans, grant, and other direct aid. And they have started a multi-year project to shift the entire bank toward addressing gender norms in everything they do. And I asked them about this. I was talking with a senior manager, a nice Swedish guy, and he said, you know, we're not doing this because it's trendy or politically correct. We're data-driven economists after all. So we're doing it because the numbers show it works better. So there is now so much information on gender transformative work circulating at the international level that a few years back, USAID founded the IGWG.org website, or the Interagency Gender Working Group, the world's worst named nonprofit initiative, simply to collate information, papers, and resources on all the work being done at the international level. So one can only hope that in 10 years, U.S. work will follow. I don't want to paint a picture that's entirely dark. There is a bit of a growing reconnect on gender norms happening in the U.S. There are a small core of organizations that are starting to do this work. Futures Without Violence has been doing it for years. Women's Funding or Population Council, not a long list, but it is there. And also a number of key funders have moved forward important grants that have a strong gender transformative focus. The Women's Foundation of Minnesota is actually, as far as I know, the first funder who is actually going to pull gender norms through all their work, through their strategic plan, their funding, their communication, development, everything. So that's really exciting, and we're working with them and tracking that with great expectation. So I guess the question is, sometimes people say, well, you know, I get what you're saying, and I think maybe I could buy it, but isn't this difficult and expensive? And actually, it's just the opposite. It's pretty easy to do, and it's also pretty inexpensive. As part of our work with Motorola, we created this little, it's not even a curriculum, I call it a mini curriculum, that was designed to challenge girls' ideas around feminine norms in STEM. It's based on some of the exercises that are gold standard in the international space that have not yet been applied to STEM. And they're pretty easy to do and pretty easy to teach. Here's one, you know, it's drawn directly from our focus group. You know, can girls be pretty and smart? And you can see it's, you know, you look at the procedure on the right, you draw 2 columns on a flip chart, and you put down pictures of a girl, and you tell participants the first girl is very pretty and popular, and the second one is considered smart. And then you get this incredibly robust discussion with the girls about the pressures they're under to pick one or the other. And you can see there's a whole bunch of like discussion questions at the end. So we really just sketched it out for them, and it's really easy to follow. We find that we can train up facilitators really in a few hours on this curriculum, and they enjoy doing it, and the girls go great. They have great discussions about this because, frankly, no one is talking to the girls about this. They're in this kind of pressure cooker where they have to adapt and deal with feminine norms, but no one is talking to them. And I often say to funders that, and policymakers, we don't have to talk to girls about feminine norms. If we don't want to, that's fine. MTV and music videos, popular culture and social networking will be glad to talk to them about it. And frankly, is having a dialogue with them 24/7 because they're always connected. So it's not if no one's going to talk to them. It's a matter of what the mix is going to be and are we going to take a place in that discussion. So this is just a little place to start having that discussion. And I mentioned this was also effective as well as being easy and inexpensive. So we provided this to the Tech Prep program, hard to say quickly, at SUNY Stony Brook in New York. And they piloted on 60 girls. We were only able to match before-after data on 38, which for those of you who know statistics better than I do, as I understand, is a very small N. And so the evaluators that don't expect too much statistically, but even with only 38 girls, the response was robust enough across all four of our target metrics that they said you're already statistically significant with only 38 respondents, which is pretty unusual for a small N. So what that means to us non-technoid people who didn't excel at statistics and STEM, what that means to us is that it wasn't just a good day or a good teacher or a good group of girls. The odds are strongly that it was actually an effect of the curriculum. And you can see all the target metrics. I like math and science. I think I will continue to like it. I plan to continue to stay in the leaky, not to leak out of the pipeline. I want to have a career. All those jumped. That's pretty good for just 6 one-hour exercises, which actually trim to 45 minutes if you're doing them classroom-based. So speaking of which, we're now talking with Columbus City Schools about maybe bringing this into a test there, which would be cool. So easy to do, inexpensive, and effective. I guess those are the thoughts that I kind of want to leave you with. And Michael, this might be a good time to open it up for Q&A. I just want to say thank you all very much for making it today. I know you have better places to be, and I look forward to answering any questions you might have or just hearing any thoughts that you might want to share.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Ricky. Always a great presentation. I especially enjoy your visuals. Always add a little spice to the fun. So, folks, as Ricky mentioned, this is a great time for you to submit the questions. Take advantage and don't be shy. We have some time remaining here, so we'll open it up and you can submit anything via the question box. In the meantime, Ricky, we here in the EPIP office certainly have some questions for you. And one thing we were discussing while you were speaking was kind of around media, and obviously we talked a lot, and you alluded to media, the role media kind of plays in reinforcing some of these norms.
Yep.
Are there specific things in kind of more popular media that work to counteract some of these reinforcing effects of standard kind of gender norms?
Almost nothing.
Yeah.
There was a STEM video, a series of STEM videos. There's one that was just done. God, it's going to drive me nuts. I got to go look it up. There was a wonderful STEM video that came out. It got, I don't know, millions of hits. And I'll remember the group that did it in just a second. But we're talking about a drop in the pond here. It's just they're inundated with this, and you just don't see very much to counter it. And it's kind of a shame because, for instance, my daughter used to love watching science shows for kids, and we would go through them, and little Einsteins and Johnny Neutron, and every single one of them, the person wearing the lab coat is always a boy. Always avoid. Even Cloudy with Meatballs, in which the girl, the female lead actually got to be a meteorologist, but spent the whole thing struggling, trying to be pretty and goofy instead of, showing her inner geek. But even that, the guy who really wears the white coat and the real scientist, of course, is a guy. And it's just, I mean, I don't want to submit too much to the lack of role models issue, but I don't think there's very much out there that challenges girls to think about that. And there have been some really good efforts, but the problem is the channels have proliferated in a way that, they're getting this from so many places. So even if you get a really great video out there up on YouTube and it's seen by millions of girls, that's the only thing they're seeing, and then there's like a zillion other things they're seeing on every other TV channel and rock and music videos and every other thing. So it's just a real problem.
Interesting.
Goldie Blocks, that was it, the Goldie Blocks one. Goldie Blocks was amazing.
Goldie Blocks.
Goldie Blocks, Goldieblox. It is just so clever and so good and so in your face. It's just, I mean, my daughter watched it 3 times back to back.
Great. Maybe we can share that on the recap page.
Yeah, I can. Can I type in where it says chat?
Yeah, sure. You can actually share with the entire audience if you choose.
Okay, if I can find the. Hang on a second.
Yeah, and if not, like I said, we can share with everyone when we recap the webinar.
Yeah, I can't see everybody. I can only see the 3 of us for some reason. It says that there are 16 people, but I can only see the 2 EPIP staffers and myself. I don't know what that's.
If you send it to me, I can also share it, so you might not be able to see everyone. So, but that's really interesting.
Got it. Here we go. Here's the video. Here's an article about it. Chat. Right message here. Okay, that's a Slate article about it, and you can just activate the flash plugin and you'll see it.
Okay, great.
It occurs to me, Michael, if you want to be high tech here, you could actually, I assume you're back to your monitor, or are we still on mine?
No, we're still on yours, but I am sharing. Unfortunately, the video sharing is not as effective as we'd like it to be.
It's a shame. It's going to be fun to watch this together.
We've done that a few times, but the audio is a little tricky. But what I'm going to do now is share that with the entire audience so folks can jump on after the webinar and take a look. We actually had a question come in from the audience from Laurel. Thanks, Laurel. She's wondering, is it possible to do gender norms intervention with older girls, high school and up, or is it crucial that we catch them in the pubescent years?
Yes. It's crucial to catch them in the adolescent years, and yes, you can do it with older girls as well. It's never too late. It's just better to get them early. I mean, I think by the time they hit college, the cake is probably baked, but of course you can still do it, and it's still a great conversation to have, especially with the number of tech and programming jobs out there. But it's always better, earlier is always better. And that's not to say that you can't repeat it also. It's not like you do it once when they're 10 and you never have to revisit it. It's great if you can come back at a later age and talk to them again and reinforce some of those ideas because, girls are changing. I also should mention, I didn't have a chance to do that, tech prep happens to be single sex, but we're now being challenged by the National Alliance for Partnerships and Equity, NAEP, which is the big school-based network, to make this co-ed. So we're going to be tweaking some of these exercises so that they also work with boys as well as girls in co-ed environments. So I thought that might have been the question too. Does this work co-ed? And the answer is going to be yes. It'll actually be more effective with co-ed because one of the biggest drivers of girls' thoughts about STEM is what they think boys are thinking about them. Sorry, beyond your question, but it may be.
No, always that's helpful.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to being part of it. I want to see the transcripts from that one. That's going to be fascinating.
Yeah. We actually had another question come in from Sean. As a woman who loved STEM through grade school but chose a degree and career in social studies but felt pressured in school to go into a math-intensive career, how do you avoid pressuring women to take careers in fields they are less passionate about because they have good STEM skills?
how do you keep girls from being pressured to take careers in STEM fields they don't want to be in? Did I understand?
Yeah, I think that's along the lines of what Sean was asking. So they might be more passionate about social studies. And Sean, you can hop in and chat if we're getting this wrong. But I'll repeat it one more time. As a woman who loved STEM through grade school but chose a degree and career in social studies and felt pressured to go into a math-intensive career, how do you avoid pressuring women to take careers in fields they are less passionate about because they have good STEM skills?
I wasn't aware they were being pressured. That's new information to me. It's a shame that would be the case. I mean, we talk about girls' interest and piquing their interest in STEM, not pressuring them to do it even if they don't want to. That doesn't make any sense. And frankly, over a long career, it's not going to stick. People eventually, if their jobs, people eventually mutate toward the field that they really want to be in, migrate toward the field. I hope people aren't pressuring girls. If that's the case,
right.
That would be
so I think that the important thing there is like a distinction between making sure their interest is piqued, as opposed to putting pressure on to, pursue that, right?
Yeah. I mean, on the flip side, there is a lot of pressure on girls to go into things like social, more social fields, like nursing or pediatrics or veterinary or being a social worker. Those are considered. I mean, typically women are shunted toward what's been called the care economy. Taking care of people. It can be actual, home health aid all the way up to, nursing. But women are typically thought of and expected to be caretakers, and there is a lot of pressure on them to go into caring occupations. Even when you see women going to medicine, very often it's in pediatric medicine. It's not in, open heart surgery. So there are still these, and it's not like anybody necessarily says you can't go in, but there seem to be these invisible guardrails that keep shifting them toward what are considered appropriate fields for women. And that's something we definitely have to overcome.
So also, Ricky, along those lines, when you talked about kind of making this kind of more of a co-ed focused intervention, do you imagine that you'll explore kind of pushing boys into some of those kind of care-focused fields? Is that kind of a piece of it?
It's an interesting question. We've never been asked. We're back into meet the parents here, where he's a male nurse. That has not typically been an issue. I've never had a fund to raise it. It would be really interesting to see that happen. It would certainly make it, I think, a different world for women and girls. But I think that the big thing is, look, we're moving from being an industrial economy to being a service economy, and a huge part of the service economy is technology and science. There's no question about it. And that is not going to reverse anytime soon. Everything is becoming automated, and there are enormously high-paying jobs in the technology sector, and that's also a sector that seems to be growing faster than almost any other sector, and it seems set to continue to indefinitely. We're becoming an online economy, and if we don't get girls into that, they're going to be left behind. Additionally, for girls coming from low-income communities or girls from a minority background who are Black or Latina, for example, or just women generally, there are entry barriers for a lot of women to get into jobs. It's one of the few places where the entry barriers are at least a little bit lower in traditionally male fields because it's a new field and it's expanding so quickly. So it's a great opportunity to bootstrap an entire generation of girls into into a high-paying growth field, and hopefully we won't bobble it and look back and say, gosh, if only we got more girls into STEM in 20 years.
Right. We actually had another question come in from Tara. Thanks, Tara. Did you find any differences in girls with disabilities being interested in STEM? Were the barriers different or similar, and were they part of your focus groups?
We unfortunately did not have any girls that I'm aware of who self-identified as having a disability, and no one had a visible disability that I'm aware of, and nobody self-identified. There, in 60 girls, you got to figure there's at least a couple, but it wasn't a question that we asked them on the before and after measure, so we don't have that data. It would be a great question to add, and we do use that on some of our surveys. It would be a great question to add on future ones. Thank you for bringing that up.
Great. Well, it looks like there aren't any other questions coming in, so I know it's a bit before 4, but Ricky, what we might do is just end a little early, unless you had anything that you wanted, anything specific that you wanted to add before we finish up.
No, I just want to thank people again. If anybody wants further information or wants to explore this in more depth, feel free to reach out. Michael has my contact information, and I thank you again for having me, Michael. It's always a pleasure.
It is always a pleasure to have you. That was a lot of fun, and I think we all learned a lot, so thank you, Ricky, as always, for being so gracious with your time. And as Ricky mentioned, folks, I'd be happy to share her info with you if you need. We'll also, of course, make the recording and slides, assuming that's okay with Ricky, available on the website within a few days or at most a week. And please make sure to fill out the post-webinar survey and enjoy the rest of your day and these additional couple of minutes that you have. Thanks, folks, and thanks again, Ricky.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Yep, you too.